You never really know when the last normal day of your life is happening. You don't get a warning. There's no special light in the sky. It just feels like a Tuesday. For 17-year-old Chloe Henderson, that last normal day started with a fight with a zipper. She was standing in front of her full-length mirror, wrestling with the back of her dress, a stiff, navy blue thing her mom had called respectable. It wasn't her. It smelled like a department store and felt like a costume. It was the uniform for the character she had to play today, the sorry teen in court. Downstairs, she could hear the familiar, comforting sizzle of her dad making his famous Saturday morning pancakes. Except it was Tuesday. He was trying so hard to create a pocket of normalcy in a day that was anything but. The smell, usually so welcoming, today just felt sad. In the kitchen, the scene was quiet. Her mom was staring into her coffee like it held all the answers. Her dad slid a plate of slightly too dark pancakes in front of Chloe's usual seat. "Fuel up, kiddo," he said, his voice a little too bright. No one really ate. The only sound was the clock on the wall, ticking away the minutes until they had to leave for the courthouse. Then, Mr. Evans, their lawyer, arrived. He was all crisp suits and confident handshakes. He gave Chloe a reassuring smile. "Remember, this is just a formality. The case is flimsy. The judge will see that. We'll be in and out. We'll be home for dinner. Home for dinner." Those 3 words became a mantra in Chloe's head. Home for dinner. Home for dinner. Just before they left, Chloe's phone buzzed. It was a text from her best friend, Sarah. "No good luck. No thinking of you." It was just about the calculus homework from the day before. A question about problem 4. It was so normal, so utterly mundane, that it filled Chloe with a sudden, fierce burst of hope. Sarah's world was still turning. The world of school and homework and gossip was still there, waiting for her. She would go to this court thing, it would be over, and by tonight, she'd be texting Sarah back about calculus. It was the last truly normal thought she would ever have. The last time she would believe, deep in her soul, that her life would just quietly go back to the way it was. She climbed into the back of the car, the stiff fabric of her dress creasing, and watched her house get smaller in the rearview mirror. She had no idea she was already saying goodbye to it. If you've never been to a county courthouse, let me tell you, it's a world unto itself. It's not quiet, like a library. And it's not orderly, like a post office. It's a strange, sad carnival of human drama, and Chloe Henderson walked right into the middle of it. The first thing that hit her was the cold. A blast of air conditioning that felt like it had been running for 100 years, chilling the vast, echoing lobby made of speckled marble and scuffed linoleum. Her shoes, the sensible flats her mom bought, made a tiny, insignificant click-clack sound that was immediately swallowed up by the noise. And the noise, it was a low, constant rumble of 100 whispered tragedies. A woman crying softly in a corner. A man arguing loudly with his lawyer, his voice tight with panic. The sharp, impatient heel steps of bailiffs and clerks moving people along like cattle. Mr. Evans led them through the crowd, a determined look on his face. As they moved down a long corridor, they passed open courtroom doors. And from each one, a snippet of someone else's life falling apart drifted out. In one, a judge's bored voice droned, "Violation of probation." In another, a lawyer was practically shouting, "My client is a taxpayer." It was overwhelming. Chloe's case, which felt like the entire world to her, was just one more file in a giant, grinding machine. That's when she saw her. The prosecutor. A woman with a severe blonde bun and a sharp, black suit that looked like armor. She was standing off to the side, reading a thick stack of papers, her brow furrowed. She never once looked up at Chloe or her family. She didn't even seem to notice they were there. She was just preparing. And something about the cold, focused intensity of that preparation made a little shiver run down Chloe's spine. Finally, they reached their courtroom. Door 7B. Mr. Evans pushed it open, and they filed into the back. The room was hushed, but it was a heavy, waiting kind of quiet. The benches were like church pews, dark and worn smooth by years of anxious people. And at the front, on a raised platform, was the judge's chair. It was massive, made of dark, carved wood, like a throne. But it was empty. And in that moment, sitting at the hard wooden defendant's table, staring at that empty chair, Chloe felt smaller than she ever had in her entire life. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't a bad dream. This was the system. And she was trapped inside it. So, the trial began. And for a little while, it actually seemed like things might be okay. It seemed like the system was working the way Mr. Evans promised it would. It was like watching someone carefully build a house of cards, and you start to believe it might just stand. The first bit of hope came from Mr. Evans himself. When he stood up to question the police officer who had first arrived at the crash scene, he was calm, methodical, and sharp. He walked the officer through every detail, and he got him to say, on the record, the most important thing, that the driver, Chloe's friend Kyle, had admitted to drinking. That he had failed a field sobriety test. That Chloe had been just a passenger, seated in the back, with no alcohol on her breath. With every question, Mr. Evans was building a wall between Chloe and the crime. It felt strong. It felt solid. But then, it was Chloe's turn. The words, "The defense calls Chloe Henderson to the stand," sent a jolt of pure electricity through her. Walking to that little wooden box, taking an oath on a Bible, it felt like a scene from a movie. But the chair was hard, and the light felt too bright, and every single person in the room was staring at her. Mr. Evans was gentle. He led her through her story, the party, the peer pressure, the split-second decision to get in the car, the instant regret. She talked about the debate team, her grades, her plans for college. She was trying to show them she was a person, not just a name on a docket. For a few minutes, she almost felt like one. Then, the prosecutor stood up. Her questions weren't gentle. They were like little knives, carefully placed. She didn't care about Chloe's grades. She cared about one text message Chloe had sent to Kyle an hour before the party. It said, "Can't wait. Gonna be a night to remember, oh." The prosecutor zeroed in on that, oh. "This night to remember," the prosecutor said, her voice dripping with implication. "You were anticipating recklessness, weren't you? You were encouraging it. This wasn't just a ride home, was it? This was part of the night's entertainment." Chloe felt the world tilt. "No, it wasn't like that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's just something you say." But the seed was planted. A simple, silly text message was being twisted into a blueprint for a crime. During a short recess, they huddled in that same sterile waiting room. Chloe was shaking. Her mom held her hand, her grip tight. But Mr. Evans leaned in, his voice low and confident. "Listen to me," he said. "You're doing great." The judge looked skeptical of her argument. "He's not buying it. We're winning. Just hang on a little longer. We are winning." Winning. That word echoed in Chloe's mind. It built the house of cards a little higher. She looked at her parents, and she saw the hope flicker back to life in their eyes. They just had to hang on. The house of cards just had to stand for a little while longer. It felt so fragile, but my God, it was still standing. After the witnesses are done, and all the words have been spoken, a trial ends with one last, long, painful silence. It's the silence of the jury deciding your fate. The lawyers give their closing arguments. The prosecutor paints a picture of a reckless night, of shared responsibility, of a life forever broken. She points at Chloe and uses words like complicit and accountable. It's cold. It's clinical. Then, Mr. Evans stands up. He talks about a good kid who made one bad mistake. He talks about a life of promise, not a life of crime. He begs the jury to see reason, not emotion. He pleads with them. You can hear the passion in his voice, and for a moment, it's hard not to believe him. And then, it's over. The jury is led out of the room to decide if Chloe gets her life back. And the waiting begins. For Chloe and her parents, time stopped. They were put in that same windowless little room, the one with the ugly beige walls and the single, buzzing fluorescent light. And they waited. The only sound was the loud, slow tick-tock of a clock on the wall. Each tick was a second of her life, just gone. Her dad paced, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. Her mom just sat, staring at her hands, unmoving. Chloe watched the clock. She watched the minute hand move. 5 minutes. 10. An hour. Mr. Evans had said a quick verdict was a good verdict. It meant the jury hadn't bought the prosecutor's complicated story. But as that first hour stretched into a second, a cold dread started to curl in her stomach. What if they were arguing? What if they believed that text message meant something? 2 hours. 3. And then, a sharp knock on the door. It made all of them jump. The bailiff stuck his head in. The jury has reached a verdict. The air was sucked out of the room. Just like that. It was over. The waiting was over. The walk back into the courtroom was the longest walk of Chloe's life. It felt like she was moving through water. Every face in the gallery was a blur. She could feel their eyes on her, but all she could see was the jury box. The 12 men and women filed back in. They wouldn't look at her. Not one of them. And in that moment, Chloe knew. Her heart just sank. Because when a jury can't look at you, it's never good news. They all stood. The judge looked at the foreman, a man in a blue shirt. "Mr. Foreman," the judge said, his voice echoing in the dead quiet, "has the jury reached a verdict?" The man said, "We have, Your Honor." A piece of paper was passed to the judge, who read it, his face giving nothing away. He passed it back. "On the count of aiding and abetting a misdemeanor DUI through complicity, how does the jury find?" The foreman looked down at the paper. He took a breath. And he said the one word that would tear Chloe's world in two. Guilty. There's a moment after a word like that is spoken, a single, suspended second where the world just stops. Where sound vanishes. Where meaning doesn't quite compute. Guilty. The word didn't just enter the room. It exploded. It was a bomb made of a single syllable. Chloe's mother let out a sound, a choked, guttural sob that was more of a puncture than a cry. It was the sound of a heart breaking in real time. Her father, beside her, erupted. "No!" he screamed, the word raw and ragged, tearing from his throat. He wasn't speaking to the judge or the jury. He was screaming at the universe, at the sheer, impossible wrongness of it all. But Chloe just stood there. The word guilty hit her like a physical force, a wave of pressure that left her numb. She felt the wood of the table under her fingertips, the scratchy fabric of her dress. She saw the judge's mouth moving, saying words about a sentencing date, but she couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. Her own body felt like a distant thing. This wasn't happening. This was the part in the movie where the hero wakes up. This was the bad dream. They were supposed to go home. Mr. Evans said they'd be home for dinner. They had talked about ordering pizza. Her calculus homework was waiting on her desk. This wasn't the plan. A hand closed around her arm. It was firm. Impersonal. A bailiff. He was pulling her hands behind her back. The cold, hard click of handcuffs snapping around her wrists shocked her system back online. The metal was unforgiving. It was real. "Chloe!" her mom cried out, her voice strangled. She turned her head, just enough to see her parents. Her strong, steady dad, his face crumpled in tears, her mom reaching for her, held back by another officer. Their faces were masks of pure, undiluted horror. And then she was being led away. Not towards the door to the outside world, to the car, to home. She was being led through a side door. A door that led deeper into the courthouse. Deeper into the system. The last thing she saw before the door swung shut was the courtroom, looking back at her, a painting of her old life. And then it was gone. In the aftermath of a disaster, there's sometimes a strange, quiet moment. The ground has stopped shaking. The wind has died down. And you dare to believe that maybe the worst is over. That's what this was. A cruel, beautiful, and temporary calm. After the verdict, there was a frantic, whispered conversation at the defendant's table. Mr. Evans, his face pale but determined, immediately argued for Chloe to be released until her sentencing hearing. He talked about her being a minor with no prior record, about her deep roots in the community, about her not being a flight risk. He spoke fast, pouring every bit of his energy into this one request. And the judge agreed. Just like that. The same judge who had just overseen her conviction now looked down and said that Chloe could go home with her parents until the sentencing date, which was set for 2 weeks away. The relief was so violent, so overwhelming, that it felt like a second shock. The bailiffs removed the handcuffs. The metal rings clattered on the table, and Chloe rubbed her wrists, the skin already feeling raw. Mr. Evans pulled the family aside in the hallway. "This is good," he said, his voice low and intense. "This is very good. It means he's still considering leniency. We'll put together a massive packet for the sentencing, character references, her school records, everything. We'll file the appeal. This is not the end. This is just a hurdle." The car ride home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that morning. It wasn't the silence of dread. It was the silence of pure, exhausted relief. They were going home. The nightmare had a new shape, a truly terrifying one, but it had an end date. Probation. Community service. A record, yes, but her life. That night, Chloe lay in her own bed. She curled up under her familiar comforter, clutching her pillow so tightly her knuckles were white. She could hear the normal sounds of her house, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of the television downstairs where her parents were sitting, probably not even watching it. They were together. They were safe. She replayed Mr. Evans's words in her head. A hurdle, not the end. Leniency. She let herself believe it. She let the warm, familiar darkness of her room convince her that the world had righted itself. The sentencing would be a formality, the final piece of unpleasant paperwork before her life could slowly, carefully, start again. She thought the worst was behind her. She had no idea she was just lying in the eye of the hurricane. 2 weeks later, they walked back into the same courtroom. But something was different immediately. The air was heavier, colder. The casual observers in the gallery were gone, replaced by a more solemn crowd. And the judge didn't look bored or skeptical anymore. He sat high up on his bench, his face a mask of grim purpose. This wasn't the same man who had let her go home. The first blow came from the victim's family. Mr. Peterson's daughter stood up to give a victim impact statement. She didn't shout. She didn't even look at Chloe. She just spoke in a clear, broken voice about her father, a vibrant, retired teacher who loved chess and gardening. She described the multiple surgeries, the constant pain, the savings account drained to zero for medical bills, the fact that he could no longer live in his own home. She talked about the loss, not just of his health, but of his independence, his joy. Her words weren't angry. They were devastated. And that was so much worse. Chloe felt every word like a physical weight, pressing her deeper into her chair. This was the real cost of that night. This was the damage. Mr. Evans stood up and fought for her. He presented a stack of papers a foot high, letters from her teachers, her debate coach, neighbors. He talked about her remorse, her future. He pleaded for probation, for community service, for a chance. "This is a child who made a mistake, Your Honor," he said, his voice passionate. "Not a criminal." The judge thanked him. He thanked the victim's family for their statement. He was calm, respectful. And then, he put on his glasses and began to speak his own words. And the tone of his voice made Chloe's blood run cold. "This court is not blind to the defendant's age," he began, his voice low and steady, like a drumbeat, "or her previously clean record. But this case transcends a simple mistake." He paused, letting the word hang in the air, making it sound small and pathetic. "We live in a society that has become far too tolerant of recklessness. We make excuses for poor judgment. We call crimes accidents, and we expect a slap on the wrist." His voice began to rise, just slightly. "But where is the justice for Mr. Peterson? Where is his second chance? His life, as he knew it, is over. Permanently." He looked directly at Chloe, and his eyes were like ice. "The law exists for a reason. It exists to draw a bright, clear line, to hold people accountable absolutely and completely. A message must be sent. Not just to you, young lady, but to every teenager in this state who thinks the rules don't apply to them. That there are no real consequences. Mr. Evans was gripping the table. Chloe's father had stopped breathing next to her. The guidelines for this offense suggest probation, the judge said, and for a fleeting second, hope flickered. But then his voice hardened into steel. But this court believes that would be a dereliction of duty. It would be an insult to the concept of justice itself. He picked up a single sheet of paper. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that the defendant, Chloe Henderson, is hereby sentenced to the Indiana Department of Corrections for a period of no less than. He said the words. 5 years. 5 years. For a mistake. For getting in a car. Can you imagine? Your entire life, everything you planned, wiped away in a single moment by a judge's gavel. What would you do if you were Chloe's parents, hearing that sentence for your child? What would your first move be? Comment below. The gasp that went through the courtroom was like a wave. Chloe's mother let out a wail that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Her father shouted, "No. You can't," before collapsing into his seat, his head in his hands. But Chloe didn't make a sound. The word 5 years just hung there. It didn't make sense. It was a number from a news story about someone else. It couldn't be for her. 5 years. She would be 22 years old. High school, college, all of it gone. The life she knew was over, right there, in that single spoken sentence. She didn't even have time to process it. The gavel slammed down. And this time, the bailiffs didn't just take her arms. They surrounded her. One of them started putting handcuffs back on, but tighter this time. There was no discussion. No going home. This was it. She looked back, one last time, as they pulled her towards the side door. She saw her parents, her anchors, completely shattered. She saw Mr. Evans, his face ashen, staring at the floor in defeat. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the sound was as final as the closing of a tomb. The word 5 years was still echoing in Chloe's mind, a ghost haunting the empty spaces in her head, when the real world came crashing back in. And it came back with hands. Firm, impersonal hands gripping her arms, leading her not out of the courtroom, but deeper into its belly. There was no time for a real goodbye. Just a frantic, heart-shattering glance over her shoulder at her parents. Her mother collapsed in her seat, her father being held back by a bailiff, his face a twisted mask of agony. Then a heavy door swung shut, and they were gone. The last thread connecting her to her old life, severed. The first stop was a holding cell right there in the courthouse. It was a small, windowless room with a cold metal bench bolted to the wall and a smell of stale sweat and disinfectant that burned her nose. They took her purse, her phone, the small silver necklace her grandmother had given her. Each item felt like a piece of her soul being removed. Then, they told her to take off the respectable navy blue dress. She changed into a set of county-issued clothes, stiff, shapeless gray pants and a top that felt like sandpaper against her skin. It was the first uniform of her new life. Then, they transported her to the county jail. The ride in the caged van was a blur of blurred streets seen through thick, wire-reinforced glass. She was a ghost already, watching the living world go by without her. Booking at the jail was a lesson in dehumanization. It was a slow, mechanical process designed to strip you down to a number. They took her fingerprints, rolling each finger in black ink. They took her mugshot, staring into a cold lens with a blank sign under her chin. She was ordered to stand against a wall with height markings, to open her mouth, to lift her tongue, to run her hands through her hair. She was inspected for lice. She was just a body. A problem to be processed. Finally, they handed her the final uniform, a jumpsuit the color of a sickly orange. The fabric was thin, scratchy, and it smelled like 1,000 other people's fear. She put it on, and it felt like she was putting on a new skin. The skin of a convict. A female guard with a tired, bored expression led her down a long, echoing corridor. The noise was the first thing that truly hit her. A cacophony of slamming steel doors, shouted orders, and the low, constant rumble of voices from behind countless bars. It was a world of sound, all of it hard, all of it angry or hopeless. They stopped in front of a cell. The guard pulled a heavy keyring from her belt, shoved a key into a thick lock, and turned it with a loud, metallic clunk. The sound was so final, so absolute, it felt like it was being drilled directly into Chloe's bones. The door slid open with a screech of metal on metal. "In you go," the guard said, her voice flat. Chloe stepped over the threshold. The door slammed shut behind her, the clang so loud it made her teeth rattle. The cell was small. 2 metal bunks bolted to the wall, a stainless steel toilet with no seat, a small sink. And sitting on the bottom bunk, watching her, was a woman. She had sharp, dark eyes and tattoos crawling up her arms. She looked Chloe up and down, from her clean-shaven face to her new, ill-fitting jumpsuit. Her expression wasn't mean, exactly. It was more like curiosity mixed with a deep, weary pity. "So," the woman said, her voice a low rasp, "what's a little mouse like you doing in a cage like this?" Chloe just stood there, frozen, her back against the cold, solid steel of the door. There were no words left. The descent was over. She had reached the bottom. And this was her new home. The first thing you learn in jail is that time doesn't work the same way. It's not measured in classes or meals with your family or TV shows. It's measured in routines. Brutal, monotonous, unchanging routines. And for Chloe, every single part of that routine was a lesson in a world she never knew existed. Her cellmate, the woman with the sharp eyes, was named Maria. She wasn't friendly, but she wasn't cruel. She was a realist. On that first morning, when a buzzer screamed at an ungodly hour, Maria sat up and said, "First rule, move when they tell you to move. Slow is suspicious. Fast is suspicious. Just move like everyone else." It was the first of many survival lessons. The cell door clanged open for breakfast. The noise in the hallway was overwhelming. Shuffling feet, muttered curses, the jangling of keys. The air was a thick soup of smells. Stale coffee, bleach, and underneath it all, the sour tang of unwashed bodies and despair. Chloe learned to keep her eyes down, but not too down. Looking at the floor marked you as a victim. Staring someone in the eye was a challenge. You had to find a middle ground, a vague, 1,000-yard stare that looked confident but wasn't looking for a fight. The cafeteria was the real proving ground. It was a cavernous room with long tables bolted to the floor, the air buzzing with tense, low conversation. Maria guided her through the line. "Second rule," Maria muttered. "You take the tray they give you. You don't complain. You don't try to trade. You eat what you can. You need the strength." Chloe found a spot at the end of a table, trying to make herself small. She saw the groups, the clusters of women who had formed their own tribes for protection. She saw the looks. Curious, predatory, dismissive. She was the new thing. The fresh meat. And everyone was sizing her up. Later that day, a letter arrived. It was passed to her by a guard during what they called rec time in a bleak, fenced-in concrete yard. The envelope was from her debate coach. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was filled with kind words, sure, but it was the news that cut deep. The team had won their regional tournament. Sarah had given a brilliant final speech. They were moving on to the state finals. Chloe read the words, and they were like hieroglyphics from a civilization she'd been erased from. Her friends' lives were moving forward, achieving milestones, while hers was frozen in this concrete nightmare. The pain was so acute it was physical, a sharp ache behind her ribs. She had to fold the letter and hide it away. Hope, it turned out, could be a weapon that the outside world used to hurt you. That's when she had her first real test. A large woman with a scowl, someone she'd later learn was named Jade, bumped into her shoulder, hard, as she walked past. "Watch it, rich girl," the woman snarled, her breath hot in Chloe's face. Every instinct in Chloe's body screamed to apologize, to shrink, to cry. But she remembered Maria's third rule, whispered to her that morning. "You give an inch in here, they take your whole life. You can't show fear. Even if you're terrified, you swallow it. You build a shell, and you never let them see inside. Chloe's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She forced herself to look up, not at the woman's eyes, but at a point on her forehead. She said nothing. She just gave a slow, single nod. It wasn't a challenge. It was an acknowledgement. I see you. I'm not scared of you. It was the bravest lie she had ever told. Jade stared her down for a long, tense second, then smirked and walked away. The immediate danger passed, but the message was received. This was a different world, with different laws. And in this world, Chloe Henderson, the honor student, was dead. She had to become someone else just to survive. Someone harder. Someone who learned to wear a mask of cold indifference, even while screaming on the inside. A few days later, they told her she had visitors. For a split second, a wild, impossible hope flared in her chest. That it was all a mistake. That they were here to take her home. But the feeling died as soon as she was led into the visiting room. This wasn't the cozy, open room you see in movies. This was something else entirely. A long, narrow room was split in two by a wall of thick, scratched plexiglass that reached from the floor to the ceiling. On her side, a small, wobbly stool was bolted to the floor. On the other side, 2 chairs. And set into the glass, every few feet, was a grimy telephone handset. There were no hugs here. No touching. You couldn't even hear the person on the other side without picking up that phone. It was like looking at someone through a dirty aquarium window. She sat down on the stool. Then the door on the other side opened, and her parents walked in. And her heart just broke all over again. Her father, her big, strong dad who could fix anything, looked shrunken. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a week. His clothes hung loose on him, and his eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He moved slowly, like every step caused him pain. Her mom, on the other hand, was trying so hard to be strong. She forced a trembling smile onto her face the moment she saw Chloe. It was the bravest, most heartbreaking thing Chloe had ever seen. They sat. There was a moment of awkward fumbling as they all picked up the sticky, cold plastic phones. The connection was tinny, filled with a faint static hiss. "Hi, sweetie," her mom's voice crackled through the receiver. It was like hearing her from the bottom of a well. "Hi, Mom," Chloe whispered. Her own voice sounded strange to her. Her dad tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He just looked at her, his eyes welling up, and shook his head. He couldn't do it. He couldn't form words. The sight of his little girl in an orange jumpsuit, behind inches of glass, was too much. He just put his hand up, palm flat against the plexiglass, a poor substitute for a hug. Chloe mirrored the gesture, pressing her own hand against the cool, hard surface. They were inches apart, but they might as well have been on different planets. Her mom started talking, a frantic, cheerful ramble about the appeal, about how Mr. Evans was working day and night, about how they were going to fight this. She talked about the weather, about the dog missing her, about anything and everything that wasn't this. The glass, the phones, the uniforms. It was a desperate performance, and everyone knew it. Chloe just listened, nodding occasionally. What could she say? That she was sharing a cell with a woman named Maria who was in for armed robbery? That she'd already been threatened in the cafeteria? That the sound of the cell door closing was the worst sound in the world? Her problems were now about survival. Their problems were still about lawyers and appeals. The gap between their realities was too wide to cross. When the guard called time, her mom's brave face finally crumbled. "We love you, baby," she sobbed into the phone. "We're going to get you out. I promise." Her dad just looked at her, his hands still on the glass, his shoulders shaking with silent tears. Then they were gone. The line went dead. Chloe placed the phone back in its cradle, the click echoing in the sudden silence. She was led back to her cell, the brief connection to her old life severed. The visit was supposed to make her feel better. Instead, she felt more alone than ever. Their pain was now a weight she had to carry, on top of her own. And in that moment, she realized a terrible truth. She wasn't just a prisoner to the state. She was a prisoner to their heartbreak, too. The jail had a rhythm, a kind of toxic ecosystem, and Chloe was starting to learn its rules. But just when you think you understand the rules, the game changes. It started with whispers. A new inmate was being transferred into their unit. Her name was Jade, and the whispers that traveled on the rec yard and in the chow line were not just anxious, they were fearful. Aggravated assault, Maria muttered to Chloe one evening, her voice low. Put 2 guys in the hospital in a bar fight. She's trouble. The kind of trouble that likes being trouble. You stay away from her. But in a place this small, you can't stay away from anyone. The very next day, the cell door clanged open, and in walked Jade. She was tall and lean, with a coiled energy that seemed to vibrate the air in the small space. Her eyes, a flat, cold brown, scanned the cell and landed on Chloe, who was sitting on her bunk trying to be invisible. A slow, unnerving smile spread across Jade's face. It didn't reach her eyes. Maria was moved out that afternoon. "Good luck, Mouse," was all she said as she gathered her things. And just like that, Chloe was alone with the predator. The first night, the tension was so thick you could choke on it. Jade didn't speak. She just watched Chloe. She watched her read a book. She watched her try to eat her dinner. She watched her brush her teeth. It was a silent, psychological warfare, and Chloe was losing badly. Every nerve in her body was screaming. The next evening, after the final head count, the cell fell into its usual uneasy quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of the jail. Jade swung her legs off her bunk and stood over Chloe. "Hey, rich girl," she said, her voice a low rasp. "I hear you got a commissary order coming tomorrow." Chloe's blood ran cold. Her parents had put $20 in her account. It was a tiny piece of normalcy, a chance to get some real toothpaste, a decent pen, maybe a candy bar. I don't know," Chloe stammered. "Yeah, you do," Jade said, her smile gone. "Here's how this is gonna work. You're gonna order my list. Double of everything. And when it comes, you're gonna hand it over. This is my cell now. You're just renting space." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment Maria had warned her about. If she gave in now, she'd be Jade's personal slave for the rest of her time here. She'd be a target for everyone. She swallowed, her mouth dry as dust. "No," she whispered. Jade's eyes narrowed. The air left the room. "What did you say to me?" Before Chloe could even think, Jade's hand moved like a snake. She didn't swing a fist. She just held up her hand, and between her thumb and forefinger, she held a shard of glass. It was about 2 inches long, one edge wrapped tightly in ragged tape to form a handle. The other edge caught the dim light from the corridor, winking with a sharp, wicked gleam. It was a shiv. Homemade, brutal, and very, very real. "See this?" Jade whispered, leaning in so close Chloe could smell the stale coffee on her breath. "This is the law in here. My law. Now, I'm gonna ask you one more time. Are you gonna be smart, or are you gonna be sorry?" She pressed the tip of the shard lightly against Chloe's throat. It wasn't enough to break the skin, but the cold, hard pressure of it was the most terrifying sensation Chloe had ever felt. This was no longer about snacks or toothpaste. This was about control. This was about whether she would leave this cell unharmed. Chloe was frozen, her back pressed against the cold cinderblock wall. She could feel the pulse in her neck beating wildly against the point of the glass. Every instinct told her to submit, to cry, to give this monster whatever she wanted. But then, a strange calm washed over her. She was already in prison for 5 years. What was the worst that could happen? A fight? Solitary? What did it matter? If she gave in now, her spirit would be broken forever. The person she used to be was already gone. Whoever was left had to fight. She looked past the shard of glass, past the fear in her own heart, and met Jade's cold, flat gaze. The choice was made. The shard of glass was cold against her throat. A tiny, precise point of pure fear. Jade's eyes were dark pools, waiting for the satisfaction of her submission. But in that frozen, terrifying moment, something in Chloe's mind snapped into focus. A clarity she usually only felt right before a big debate, when the world faded away and only the argument remained. She couldn't fight Jade physically. She would lose. Horribly. But a fight isn't always about fists. She took a slow, shaky breath, careful not to press her neck forward. Her voice, when it came out, was not a whisper, not a plea. It was low and unervingly calm. "You're from Terre Haute," Chloe said. Jade's eyebrows twitched in surprise. The pressure of the shiv didn't lessen, but the triumph in her eyes flickered. It wasn't the reaction she wanted. "What did you say to me?" Jade hissed. "The tattoo on your wrist," Chloe continued, her eyes flicking down to the faded ink of a star with the letters I. "I had a cousin who lived there. He said the west side, by the river. It was a hard place to be a kid." She was taking a wild gamble, using a detail she'd observed days ago, piecing it together with a half-remembered story. She wasn't trying to win a fight. She was trying to become a person, not a target. "You don't know nothing about me," Jade snarled, but there was a crack in her armor now. Confusion. This wasn't following the script. "I don't," Chloe agreed, her gaze steady. "And you don't know anything about me. You see a rich girl. I see a woman who's had to be tough her whole life just to breathe. We're not so different in here. We're both just trapped." She was speaking to the humanity she suspected was buried under all that anger and armor. She was using the only weapon she had left, empathy. Forged in debate club, sharpened by desperation. Jade stared at her, the shiv still poised. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Chloe could hear her own heart pounding, a frantic drum against her ribs. She had either just saved herself, or made everything infinitely worse. Then, ever so slightly, Jade's hand lowered. The point of the glass moved away from Chloe's throat. The immediate, physical threat was gone, but the danger in the air was still electric. Jade didn't smile. She didn't apologize. She just looked at Chloe with a new, simmering respect, mixed with a deep, weary suspicion. "You've got a mouth on you, rich girl," she muttered, turning the shiv over in her hand. "A smart mouth. That's gonna get you in more trouble than I ever could." Just then, the heavy footfalls of a guard echoed down the corridor. Jade smoothly palmed the shard of glass, making it disappear as if it were never there. She turned her back on Chloe and climbed onto her bunk. The confrontation was over. But the war wasn't. A tense, silent truce had been formed, built not on friendship, but on a strange, newfound recognition. Chloe had held her ground without throwing a punch. She had fought her first real battle in this place, and she had survived. But she knew, as she lay in the dark, listening to Jade breathe, that she had just made herself infinitely more interesting to the most dangerous person in her world. In a place where every piece of mail was opened and read by the guards, a letter was never just a letter. It was an event. It was a tiny, paper-thin piece of the outside world, and you held onto it like a lifeline. So, when a guard slid a single plain envelope through the slot in the cell door one afternoon, Chloe's heart leapt into her throat. She expected it to be from her parents, or maybe from Mr. Evans with an update on the appeal, something full of the same desperate, hopeful words. But the return address made her blood run cold. It was from him. Mr. Arnold Peterson, the man whose life she had ruined. For a long time, she just stared at it, her hands trembling. This was it. This was the hatred she deserved. This was the final condemnation, the written proof of the pain she had caused. She almost didn't want to open it. The fear of what was inside was paralyzing. Finally, with a deep breath, her fingers shaking, she tore it open. The handwriting was elegant, a little shaky, but precise. To Miss Henderson, it began. She braced herself for the anger. But it never came. "I am writing to you from my daughter's home in Muncie," the letter read. "The view from my window is of a bird feeder and a small oak tree. It is a quiet view. A peaceful one." Chloe's brow furrowed. She kept reading. "I want you to know that I have followed your case in the news. I was in the courtroom on the day you were sentenced. I heard the prosecutor speak for me, and I heard the judge speak of justice. But they never once asked me what justice would look like." A single tear slipped down Chloe's cheek and landed on the paper, blurring the ink. She wiped it away quickly, afraid to damage this precious, impossible thing. What that young woman said in that courtroom, he wrote, she did not say for me. What that judge did to you, he did not do for me. True healing cannot be built on another's ruin. It only creates more brokenness. What happened was a terrible tragedy. But it was an accident. And I forgive you. The word forgive seemed to glow on the page. It was a word she had never dared to hope for, a word that felt more foreign than any of the curses she heard in the jail. Do not let this place harden your heart, Chloe, the letter concluded. Hold on to the good person I know you are. The world will need her when she gets out. Chloe read the letter 3 more times, then carefully folded it and tucked it into the one secret pocket she had in her jumpsuit. It wasn't just a letter. It was an absolution. It was a shield. In all the cold, gray concrete, in all the noise and fear and anger, this one old man's grace was the first truly warm thing she had found. And she would cling to it for dear life. 4 weeks after Mr. Peterson's letter, Chloe carried herself differently. The forgiveness she'd been given was like a secret shield. She walked through the cafeteria. She endured Jade's silent presence. She survived the endless, grinding days with a new kind of strength. It was a strength fueled by hope. Hope that the system, which had been so cruel, might have a shred of mercy left in it. Hope that the appeal would work. When the guard told her she had a legal visit, that hope burst into full, brilliant bloom. This was it. The news she'd been waiting for. But the moment she saw Mr. Evans, her hope curdled in her chest. He was waiting for her in a small, private room used for lawyer-client meetings. He looked exhausted. The crisp, confident suit was rumpled. His tie was loose. And his eyes, when they met hers, held a devastation that told her everything she needed to know before he even spoke. "Chloe," he said, his voice gravelly. He didn't bother with hello. "The appeal, it's been denied." The words landed like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. The shield of Mr. Peterson's letter didn't feel so strong anymore. "Denied," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. He nodded, running a hand through his already messy hair. The appellate court upheld the sentence. They said the trial judge acted within his discretionary power. They wouldn't even hear an argument about the obscurity of the statute. It's over, Chloe. The legal path is closed. Over. The finality of it was a tombstone settling onto her future. 5 years. It was no longer a temporary nightmare. It was her life. She would be 22 years old when she got out. A felon. Her life, as she had dreamed it, was truly, officially erased. She didn't cry. She was too numb for tears. She just stared at the scarred table between them. Mr. Evans let the silence hang for a moment, respecting the gravity of the loss. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his expression shifting from defeated to intensely serious. "But there is one more path," he said, his voice dropping. "One last, long shot, nearly impossible option. It's not a legal one. It's a political one." Chloe looked up, a tiny ember of curiosity fighting through the numbness. "A gubernatorial pardon," he said. "It's the only thing that can completely wipe this away. The governor has the power to essentially erase this conviction as if it never happened." For a second, a wild, impossible image flashed in her mind, walking out the front gates, completely free. But Mr. Evans saw it and gently shook his head. "I need to be straight with you, Chloe. It's a Hail Mary. Governors rarely grant pardons, especially to people who haven't served a significant portion of their sentence. The politics are messy. It's an act of pure grace, not legal argument." "So how do we get it?" Chloe asked, her voice hollow. "We don't argue for it," Mr. Evans explained. "We plead for it. We make a case so compelling, so public, that the governor can't ignore it. We need a story. Not about legal technicalities, but about a fundamental miscarriage of justice. We need to make the public care. We need newspapers, TV stations, social media. We need a storm. We need to make you the face of a broken system." He looked at her, his gaze piercing. We need to make them see you not as a case number, but as a person. As a daughter. As the girl who got that letter from Arnold Peterson. Chloe's hand instinctively went to the secret pocket in her jumpsuit, where the letter was safely tucked away. Do not let this place harden your heart. The words echoed in her mind. She thought of the coldness of the judge, the impersonal cruelty of the system, the daily struggle to remain human in this place. She thought of her parents' broken faces during visitation. She looked across the table at her defeated, desperate lawyer. She thought of the one man who had shown her kindness, and what his forgiveness had cost him. The numbness began to recede, burned away by a new, fierce fire. The legal path was closed. Fine. She would take the human one. She looked Mr. Evans directly in the eye, her voice clear and steady for the first time since she'd entered the room. Then I'll tell my story. When the law fails you, when the courts turn their back, what do you have left? You have your story. And Chloe Henderson, sitting on her thin prison mattress, decided it was time to tell hers. It started with a pencil. A cheap, yellow No. 2 pencil that was barely sharpened. And a stack of coarse, single-ply toilet paper, the only paper she could reliably get her hands on without raising suspicion. It wasn't a grand beginning, but it was a start. At first, the words were just for her. She wrote about the crash. Not as a legal event, but as a moment of teenage stupidity, of a choice made in a blur of laughter and peer pressure that ended in the sickening crunch of metal and glass. She wrote about the trial, about the feeling of the stiff dress, the way the prosecutor's voice seemed to sand away her humanity, layer by layer. She wrote about the sound of the word guilty, and how it felt like a door slamming shut on the world. But then, she started writing about what came after. She didn't just write about the fear. She wrote about the people. She wrote about Maria, the realist, who taught her how to survive. She wrote about Jade, not as a monster, but as a product of a system that had hardened her long before this cell. She wrote about the woman in the next cell who cried for her children every night. She wrote about the sounds, the smells, the taste of the food, the bone-deep chill that the concrete walls seemed to radiate 24 hours a day. She was no longer just writing a diary. She was bearing witness. She was giving a voice to the voiceless, to the women the world had forgotten. And in doing so, she found a voice for herself that was stronger and clearer than any she had ever used on the debate team. This wasn't about winning an argument. This was about telling the truth. Meanwhile, on the outside, her parents were working with a small, determined PR firm Mr. Evans had found. They started a simple website and social media campaign called Justice for Chloe. It was a long shot, a tiny flame in a very dark internet. Then, they started publishing Chloe's writings. They didn't edit them much. They posted pictures of the toilet paper pages, her cramped, careful handwriting stark against the cheap paper. They typed the words out underneath. The rawness was the point. This wasn't a polished press release. This was a scream from the inside. The first post was about the shard of glass. About the cold pressure against her throat, and the choice to fight with words instead of violence. It went viral in their local community. 1,000 shares. Then 10,000. The next post was about Mr. Peterson's letter. About forgiveness from the one person who had every right to hate her. That one was picked up by a state newspaper. Then a national blog. People were captivated. They weren't just reading about a legal case anymore. They were reading about a human being. They were feeling the cold of the cell, smelling the disinfectant, understanding the daily terror. They were meeting Jade and Maria. They were seeing the profound grace of an old man named Arnold Peterson. Chloe's words were a key, unlocking a door of public empathy that the legal system had barricaded shut. The campaign exploded. #JusticeForChloe started trending. News vans, which had long since left after the initial sensational verdict, now returned, parked outside the jail, demanding comments. Inside her cell, Chloe kept writing. The pencil grew shorter, her stack of toilet paper thicker. She had been stripped of everything, her freedom, her future, her name. But they had left her with her voice. And she was discovering it was the most powerful weapon she had ever possessed. A story, once it gets loose, can become a living thing. It can grow and spread in ways no one can control. And Chloe's story was now alive, and it was roaring. It started locally, of course. The Indianapolis news stations, which had initially reported her sentencing as a brief, tough-on-crime story, now ran follow-ups. But the tone had completely changed. Instead of a mugshot, they showed images of her toilet paper journals. Instead of a prosecutor's soundbite, they featured readings of her powerful, raw words. The narrative flipped from "teen sentenced for crash" to "Is this justice?" Then, it went national. A major cable news network ran a primetime special. They didn't just talk about the legal case. They interviewed her debate coach, who broke down crying. They interviewed her parents, who looked older, more tired, but now had a fire of determination in their eyes. And most powerfully, they interviewed Mr. Arnold Peterson, the victim. Sitting in his daughter's living room, he looked into the camera, his voice steady but soft. "They used my pain to break that child," he said. "That wasn't my pain. That was their politics. I forgive Chloe Henderson. It's time for the state of Indiana to do the same." That segment broke the internet. Petitions exploded, garnering hundreds of thousands of signatures almost overnight. "Justice for Chloe" and "Free Chloe Henderson" started trending simultaneously. Editorial boards in major newspapers wrote scathing pieces about prosecutorial overreach and judicial cruelty. The story was no longer just about a girl in a prison cell. It became a symbol, a rallying point for everyone who feared the cold, impersonal grind of the justice system. It was about second chances. It was about redemption. And all of that noise, that immense public pressure, had a single final destination: the governor's desk. The governor, a pragmatic man in the middle of a tough re-election campaign, could no longer ignore the controversy. His aides were flooded with calls. His social media was inundated. Protesters stood outside the wrought iron gates of the governor's mansion in Indianapolis, holding signs with Chloe's face on them. He had two choices. He could stand behind the original sentence and risk looking heartless to a now sympathetic public, or he could intervene and risk looking soft on crime to his base. It was a political nightmare. But the pressure was immense. The story was too powerful, too human, to ignore. Finally, the governor made a decision. He wouldn't make a promise. He wouldn't even give a hint. But he would take a step. He dispatched his most trusted senior aide, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Vance, to the county jail. Her mission was simple: to see the girl behind the hashtag. To look Chloe Henderson in the eye and decide if she was a media creation or the real deal. The fate of Chloe's future, the culmination of all that hope and pain and public outcry, now rested on this one private meeting. The storm had reached the highest office in the state. And now, it was coming for Chloe. They brought her to a different room this time. Not the lawyer's room, and definitely not the plexiglass visitor's tank. This was a small, sterile office, usually used by the guards. But today, it felt like the most important room in the world. Sitting at a simple table was a woman Chloe had never seen before. Dr. Eleanor Vance. She was dressed in a severe, elegant pantsuit, her hair in a neat silver bob. She had a folder in front of her and a pen, but no recorder. This was off the record. Her eyes were intelligent, sharp, and deeply skeptical. This was not a friend. This was an evaluator. "Chloe," Dr. Vance said, her voice calm and measured. "Thank you for meeting with me." Chloe just nodded, her mouth dry. She could feel the weight of her future in this woman's hands. Dr. Vance didn't waste time. "Your writings are very compelling. You've sparked a national conversation. But I need to understand something. Are you a very clever young woman who has learned to manipulate a narrative? Or are you the remorseful person you appear to be on paper?" The question was a trap, designed to throw her off balance. It questioned her very soul. Chloe took a slow breath. She thought of Mr. Peterson's letter. Hold on to the good person. Does it have to be one or the other? Chloe asked, her voice quiet but steady. "I was clever on my debate team. I learned how to tell a story there, too. But the story I'm telling now, it's just the truth. I'm not asking for you to think I'm innocent. I'm asking for you to see that the punishment doesn't fit the crime. That it doesn't help anyone. It didn't help Mr. Peterson. It's just destroying another life. Dr. Vance's expression didn't change, but she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She moved on, asking harder questions. About the crash. About her remorse. About her life before. She was testing her, probing for inconsistencies, for a performance. Chloe answered everything with an honesty that felt raw and painful. She didn't try to make herself sound like a saint. She admitted her fear, her shame, her moments of weakness in jail. Then, Dr. Vance gestured to the folder. The warden's reports mention an incident. A weapon. A shard of glass. With your cellmate, Jade. What happened? This was it. The moment that could ruin everything. They could spin this as prison violence. Chloe didn't hesitate. She reached into the secret pocket of her jumpsuit and pulled out the shard, still wrapped in its ragged tape. She placed it gently on the table between them. Dr. Vance's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected her to still have it. I could have used it, Chloe said, her gaze locked on the glass. I was terrified. But I didn't. I chose to speak instead. I chose to see the person holding it, not just the weapon. She looked up at Dr. Vance. That's what I'm asking for now. For someone to see me. Not the inmate. Not the case number. The person. She left the shard of glass on the table, a silent testament to her choice. The rest of the interview was a blur. More questions, but the tension had shifted. The stern skepticism in Dr. Vance's eyes had softened into something more complex. Thoughtfulness. Respect. When the guard came to take Chloe back to her cell, Dr. Vance stood. She didn't smile. She didn't make a promise. Thank you for your time, Chloe, was all she said. But as Chloe was led away, she glanced back. Dr. Vance was still standing there, looking down not at her notes, but at the shard of glass on the table. She wasn't seeing a weapon. She was seeing a choice. And in a place defined by violence, that choice was the most powerful argument Chloe could have ever made. In prison, hope is a dangerous thing. It's a flicker of light that can either guide you or burn you. After Dr. Vance left, Chloe tried to smother that flicker. She went back to the routine. The buzzers, the head counts, the tasteless food. She didn't let herself think about it, because hoping and losing would be a pain worse than any sentence. So, when the cell door clanged open a few days later and the warden himself, a man she had only ever seen from a distance, stood there, her first thought was pure panic. What had she done wrong? But his face wasn't stern. It was unreadable. Henderson. Gather your things. Her things. The concept was almost funny. She had a few letters, her toilet paper journals, and the clothes she came in with. That was it. As she stuffed them into a paper bag, her hands trembled. This could be a transfer to a state prison. A worse place. Jade, watching from her bunk, gave a slow, knowing nod. It's not a transfer, rich girl, she said, her voice low. They don't send the warden for a transfer. Chloe's heart began to hammer. She was led not to the transport bay, but to the processing area. And instead of being given a new jumpsuit, they handed her a plastic bag. Inside were the clothes she'd worn to court that first day. The stiff, navy blue dress. The woman processing her actually smiled. Sign here, she said, pushing a form. It was a release form. The world began to swim. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The final door stood before her. The one that led to the lobby, to the outside. The warden stood beside it. The governor called this morning, he said, his voice even. Full and unconditional pardon. The conviction is erased. He pushed the door open. The light from the windows in the public lobby was so bright it made her eyes water. And standing there, in a pool of that brilliant, beautiful light, were her parents. They weren't crying. They were just standing, waiting, their faces filled with a hope so fragile it looked like it might break. Chloe took one step, then another. She was through the door. Her mom rushed forward and wrapped her in a hug so tight it stole her breath. Her dad joined them, his big arms around both of them, his shoulders shaking. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. Chloe buried her face in her mom's shoulder, the familiar smell of her perfume cutting through the sterile jail stench. She was out. She was free. The nightmare was over. But as she stood there, holding her family, she knew the person walking out was not the same girl who had walked in. That girl was gone. And the woman who was leaving, her story was just beginning. The first night in her own bed should have been a dream. The soft mattress, the familiar smell of her own pillow. But it was a nightmare. The silence was deafening. In jail, there was always noise, the constant, low-grade hum of misery. Here, the quiet was so absolute it felt heavy, pressing down on her. She lay awake for hours, her body tense, waiting for the next buzzer to scream, for the next cell door to clang shut. Freedom, it turned out, wasn't an on-off switch. It was a slow, painful unwinding. The next morning, she looked at the navy blue dress hanging in her closet. The costume she'd worn to her trial. She took it off the hanger, folded it neatly, and shoved it into the very back of a drawer, out of sight. She couldn't bear to look at it. She put on an old pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, clothes that held no memory of courtrooms or handcuffs. Downstairs, her parents moved around her like she was a ghost. They were so happy, so relieved, but they were also terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. They'd make her a big breakfast, but she could only pick at it. Her stomach had shrunk to the small, bland portions of jail food. A stack of mail waited for her on the table. College rejection letters. They'd arrived while she was gone. She didn't even open them. What was the point? That path was closed. The life she had meticulously planned was a ruin. But in that same stack was another letter. The postmark was from the state penitentiary. It was from Jade. With trembling fingers, Chloe opened it. "Heard you got out, rich girl," it began in Jade's rough scrawl. "Guess that smart mouth of yours worked after all. Don't waste it. Most of us in here, we never get a second chance. You got one, so live. For all of us." Chloe folded the letter and held it tight. Jade was right. She was out, but she wasn't free. Not really. Not while the system that had trapped her was still trapping others. She looked at the college rejections, then back at Jade's letter. One path was closed. But maybe, just maybe, another one was beginning to open. The world outside was loud, bright, and moved too fast. But Chloe stood still in the center of her room, holding Jade's letter in one hand and a stack of college rejection letters in the other. One was a message from her past, a life that was now a closed door. The other was a message from her present, a reminder of the world she'd left behind, and the debt she now owed. She walked to her desk, the same one where she'd spent so many hours studying for tests and writing essays for college. She cleared it of the old, ghostly remnants of that life. Then, she sat down. She opened a new notebook, a real one, with clean, blank pages, and picked up a pen. She didn't write about the past. She began to write about the future. She wrote down names. Maria, Jade, the women whose stories were now intertwined with hers. She wrote down ideas. About justice. About redemption. About a system that confused punishment with healing. Then, she picked up her phone and called Mr. Evans. "Chloe," he answered, his voice filled with warmth and relief. "How are you, kid?" "I'm not sure yet," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But I know what I need to do. I'm not going to college to study literature." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, what will you study, then?" "Law," Chloe said, the word feeling solid and right in her mouth. "I'm going to law school." She could almost hear his smile through the phone. "I think that's a brilliant idea." After she hung up, she looked at the first page of her new notebook. The judge had sentenced her to 5 years in prison. But that was someone else's sentence, born of anger and a broken system. She had given herself a new one. A life sentence of fighting for the ones the system forgets. of using the voice she found in the darkness to speak for those who were silenced. And that sentence, that one changes everything. Chloe's story is fiction, but the system it portrays is all too real. If her journey from victim to advocate left you with a clenched fist and a hopeful heart, then subscribe. Because next week, we're telling the story of a man who found something buried in his grandfather's backyard that rewritten the history of his entire town.